We're not at a point of making a formal recommendation yet, but we have these public hearings per law to solicit input from the public on what properties we're considering for recommendation. Just some administrative notes. We do have a strict timeline, so I'm going to try and keep us on point with time as best as I can. And at the end of our public testimony, we're going to open it up for questions and answers. So with that, I would like to introduce our board. We have 6 White House appointed board members. 4 are here in person today. And to my right is Mr. Nick Rahal, former congressman from West Virginia, one of our original board members. And then Dan Matthews, former Public Building Service commissioner, is also on our board and is also on the House T&I committee for a number of years and was really involved with the design of the FASTA legislation that created us. Then we have David Winstead, another former General Services Administration Public Building Service Commissioner. And then lastly, Jeffrey Garral, who is the president and CEO of GFP Real Estate in New York. And again, the 2 board members who were not able to join us in person is our acting chairman, Talmadge Hocker from Louisville, Kentucky, and former Congressman Mike Capuano from Boston, Massachusetts. They could not join us. So, and again, it's a bipartisan board, all White House appointed, and a very diverse background in terms of experience. And before I introduce our first speaker, I also want to thank our strategic partners that really, without their help, we would not have been able to do this today. So Jones Lang LaSalle, our real estate consultant. Will Shelley's up front, thank you. Alito is our strategic consultant, really involved in a lot of the communication support we do. And then finally, Pugh and Tiller, who is our media support. So without those 3 strategic partners, this event would not have been possible because I'm actually the sole full-time federal staff on the board, so I rely on these people very heavily to get our mission accomplished. So with that, with those introductions, I'd like to introduce Mr. Rahal to talk about our history.
Thank you, Paul. Is this on?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Paul. Throughout our work on the PBRB, which, as Paul mentioned, is a bipartisan board and an independent board, I might add, we've noticed the same issues cropping up time after time after time after time. The lights are on, but nobody's home. The federal inventory of office space is open for employees, but few employees are returning to work. This means that taxpayers are paying enormous amounts of dollars to provide for the few who do come to work. Our board found a nearly 70% decrease in occupancy in a study of selected properties in the Washington, D.C. area in 2023. American taxpayers are paying a maximum market rate, premium market rate, for agencies to be housed in spaces that are definitely not premium spaces. The federal buildings that the PBRB has toured are in poor repair, are in need of extensive capital investment, and cannot possibly be serving the best interests of the agencies they house. The capital liability of all the deferred maintenance is enormous. Capital liabilities accrue, of course, to the taxpayer. This means that although taxpayers are paying market rates for space, the market rates are not being spent to maintain and adequately manage the spaces. The maintenance backlog translates into unhealthy and sometimes unsafe work conditions and work environments for our federal employees. The board learned about outdated air handling systems, for example, from the 1940s that are still being pressed into service. We have found leaking roofs, unstable elevators, and flooding basements. The fact of the matter is that Congress cannot appropriate its way out of this maintenance backlog. This means that the inventory needs to be shrunk so that tax dollars can be invested in properties where employees are actually coming to work. I'll now turn it over to our board member and former GSA Commissioner, Dan Matthews, who will highlight the elements of our work.
Thank you, Nick. I appreciate that. Can you all hear me? I can't really hear myself. So, well, one thing we like to say at the very beginning is we are an independent board. As our board member, Ms. Rahal, just mentioned, we're a bipartisan board, and we're not DOJ, and we're not GSA. Those are two very different entities. Our role really is to recommend properties for disposal. Congress created us as an independent board, quite frankly, because they didn't trust the executive branch of the government to put properties that should be in the disposal pipeline into the disposal pipeline. They wanted an outside, independent, private sector, in many ways, based real estate expertise to look at that inventory without all the various pressures and other considerations that work within the government, and have a kind of a clear-eyed financial objective review, and then make recommendations to a very high level in the executive branch. So our recommendations go to the director of the Office of Management and Budget, which is part of the White House. And if the director of OMB says yes, then the law says the government has to execute on and implement our recommendations. So in general, that's why we're here, to have that really independent look at these different assets all across the country, and then bring those recommendations literally to the highest level of the White House and the budget-making process of the federal government to get an up or down vote effectively, and then decide whether or not to move forward. In practice, most of those properties that Congress asked us to look at are controlled by the General Services Administration. They're largely the civilian real estate landlord for the federal government. For the most part, we're excluded from looking at DOD properties, Department of War properties. So GSA is, in many ways, our internal governmental partner on this, because so many of the properties are managed by the GSA. We basically have two criteria, maybe three, if we're looking at properties. One is occupancy. And as we saw, particularly during the pandemic, government occupancies in federal buildings were way below 50%. They were way below 25%. In Washington, D.C., the headquarters, we were finding large headquarters buildings that had occupancy levels of maybe 5%, 7%, 8%. And then when you do the math, just taking the annual operating expenses of those buildings, divided by the number of people that were actually coming in and using the buildings, we were coming up with annual operating costs of $150,000, $160,000, $180,000 per person. In Washington, D.C., with any reasonable utilization rate, you could have trophy office space, literally the best office space in Washington, D.C., and maybe spend $35,000, $40,000 per person per year. So clearly something was wrong, and frankly, I think the board's role is quite important. So we're looking at occupancy, we're looking at capital liabilities, how much do you have to invest in these buildings to recapitalize them, and that kind of then translates into what are the annual costs per person. As Mr. Rahal just said, Congress doesn't appropriate anywhere near enough money to address the capital liabilities. The average age of a GSA building is 50 years. They have almost 180 million square feet of owned space. And in most markets, again, utilization rates are well below 50%, and even post-pandemic with a requirement to come back into the office. And those capital liabilities are in the billions of dollars. As you'll see here, we just did a study on our own with our private sector contractor support, JLL, and our estimate is it's easily $50 billion of capital liabilities just in GSA's portfolio. That's literally 2 times what GSA officially says it is today. And when Congressman Rahal was a ranking member of the Transportation Infrastructure Committee, they were telling the committee at that time was probably around, it was under $10 billion. So the need is absolutely massive. Congress appropriates on average about $700 million a year. to maintain that portfolio. But, commercial asset management practices would say you need to invest 2 to 4% of the replacement value annually just to maintain. That number, when you apply it to the GSA portfolio, it's about $2.5 billion a year. So every year they're going 1.8 or more billion dollars a year further into the hole. Every year it gets worse. Again, I think the bottom line there is the government, just given their budget situation, they're not going to renovate their way out of this problem. It just isn't there. The only solution, frankly, is a radical reduction in that portfolio. And there are so many assets, which we'll be talking about later today, where you'll see there are significant private sector interest or other governmental level interest in those properties. They have the money to maintain the properties. They'll get their highest and best use out of it. It just doesn't make a lot of sense for the federal government to hold on to it. At this point, I'll just go ahead and pass it on to David.
Dan, thank you. Pleasure to be here. I'm David Winstead. I've been a real estate lawyer most of my life, but served in the George W. Bush administration as public commissioner like Dan. And I wanted to just talk a little bit about the opportunity. Appreciate the mayor being here and the team here in the city of Charleston. But there are enormous opportunities the board feels coming up as a result of the impact of telework, the allowance of federal employees to use telework. We've had a shift in that. The Biden administration allowed federal employees to telework all but 1.5 days a week, so 2.5 days per 2-week pay period. They could be working from home, which kept a lot of the vacancies that Dan talked about. Obviously, President Trump had an executive order directing federal employees to return to the office, so we are seeing increased utilization of properties. But the situation just has not changed. GSA, having been there and supportive of the team over the years, our board, Paul, our consultants, coordinate regularly with GSA every day. Everything we look at, everything we study, we share with the portfolio staff at GSA and the disposal staff who's in charge of moving out unnecessary, underutilized assets. So there's some really interesting opportunities for people here that are interested in real estate and development. Charleston, the mayor, talked to us yesterday about the wonderful state of development and conversion of historic buildings in Charleston to residential, to restaurants. And it's wonderful to be here and see that as a fact. One other comment I would make, obviously I was in a law firm that uses about 60% of the space they did before COVID. So we downsized 30%. A huge decrease in the private sector because of the cost of housing an employee and the impact of telework, candidly. But there are really some wonderful opportunities, and this slide talks about one that's right next door here, and that we're meeting here in the Dewberry Hotel is about 2 blocks away, and it was commissioned in the 1960s. And the conversion of this federal property to private ownership really brought a tax base increase to the city of Charleston, generated jobs, provided mixed-use development in and around it to support the hotel, and obviously continued to benefit from the huge growth in Charleston as a travel center of the country, candidly. I think, Mayor, it's the wedding capital, right?
Only behind Las Vegas.
There you go. But it's a great, it opened its doors in 1965 as the L. Mendel Rivers Federal Building. Was the home of the Corps of Engineers in the Charleston District. Obviously, they have a major mission given all the controls of flooding and things that Corps are responsible for. But there had been over the years large-scale water intrusion into the building. There had been asbestos materials present in the structure, ultimately creating environmentally hazardous workplace. And so GSA actually in the last year that I was commissioner conveyed this property, and it's now obviously an incredible hotel, high-class hotel that is now doing quite well financially. So we've seen this transformation here in Charleston from 1965 to 2026 of a conversion of an office building for engineers to a very classic and attractive office space. So talking about adaptive reuse, we feel strongly that these assets are, have major character in these cities, and that it's helpful and very much necessary to engage the public, both the real estate community, obviously city council and mayors and the like, in looking at adaptive use opportunities. And this one that the slide was the 2008 and the conversion by John Dewberry into the Dewberry Hotel. But there's another example that I think we have here, Paul, of the board also. No, apologize. This is still the Mendel Building, isn't it? Yeah. But it has generated, when completed in 2016, it had a total investment by Mr. Dewberry of $77 million and provides about $680,000 in annual rent per year, and obviously created jobs now and will in the future. I wanted to also, that's an example here in Charleston, but GSA has very recently taken action on some buildings that we found as grossly underutilized in the District of Columbia. And I would just point out that fortunately they're now moving into sale. One of them is a 7th and D building, which is downtown. It was the home of GSA's regional office. The DHS had major presence there. It was 900,000 square feet. GSA was able to move their staff there into the GSA headquarter building at 17th and H Street. And so that is now on the block, and they're apparently in best and final for a developer to utilize that site. Likewise, the Liberty Loan Building, which is one of the buildings that we reported out in March, is now it's 141,000 square foot. It was the Department of Treasury building in the southwest quadrant of D.C., and it also is very much ready to be awarded. My understanding is it's best and final. There are a lot of potential uses, but one is a hotel because it looks straight over at the Lincoln Memorial and the Jefferson Memorial there. So it's a great near term. These are just in play now and will be converted and redeveloped shortly. The other two projects that I'd just like to mention that are very important, I think somewhat relevant for classic landmark historic buildings, is GSA, through an authority that they have under the Historic Preservation Act, Section 111, was able to ground lease a building near Gallery Place in Washington, D.C., next to the Convention Center, that was originally a patent office, into a Climpton hotel called a Monaco Hotel. And it was about 15 years ago or more that was conveyed through a ground lease for the redevelopment as a hotel. So that's another classic case of a underutilized, unnecessary federal building that now has currency providing hotel space in Washington, D.C. And then the last one is somewhat one you probably all heard about, but the old post office building on Pennsylvania Avenue that President Trump acquired before he was president and developed into a hotel. It was recently taken over by Waldorf Astoria, and I understand there may be some challenges with its current operation, but that was done through a ground lease, 60-year ground lease, and then redeveloped with, I think, $200 million worth of funding into a major hotel. So we have the opportunities we're talking about have real near-term need and opportunity for redevelopment. And so I wanted to make that point, and that we will continue to work closely with GSA, their portfolio people and the disposal people, to point out what we have found in our analysis and recommend to them the action that they have the power to do in terms of transaction. So Jeff, I'll turn it over to Jeff for some additional discussion.
Hi, my name is Jeff Gural, and I'm in the real estate business in New York City for about 50 years. And a lot of what we did originally was converting old industrial buildings to Class B offices. New York had 1,500,000 manufacturing jobs, and right now they're down to 50,000. So there are quite a few buildings that were eligible to be purchased and converted to office buildings. And now what we're seeing is these B buildings, if they have vacancy, now they're being converted to residential. So we've seen the full cycle that these buildings were built. Some of them were built as industrial, and now they're going through second change over to residential. I'm also the grandfather of 2 College of Charleston students who graduated, so my wife and I always look forward to coming to visit Charleston. You're lucky. It's a beautiful city. We met with the mayor yesterday, and he showed us his plans for the waterfront, and I think that'll just enhance the tourist experience. We also looked into the possibility, which the mayor is interested in the famed Custom House. We took a tour, and the design of these historic custom houses provided for extensive common space to the tune of about 1 square foot of common space for every square foot of actual office space. As you can imagine, that is extremely inefficient in the modern world. Historically, these were bustling places of commerce during the 19th century, with tariff revenues accounting for over 80% of the federal revenue. As you might expect, tariff revenues are back. And I think they told me that $60 billion of tariff revenue goes through there. I'm sure it's not in cash, but so it's interesting it's come back. The building is completely shuttered to the public, which is unfortunate, and the common spaces remain empty, while the few employees that do enter the building occupy private offices. We estimate the cost per employee simply to operate and maintain the building to be in excess of $65,000 per year per employee. We've engaged in dialogue with the mayor. As I said, we met with him yesterday to see his long-term plan. And it's clear that this is something that could work very well for the city of Charleston. The federal government would receive the proceeds from the asset sale, and the property would be added to the local tax rolls, plus it would save a fortune in maintenance. They told us they just gave out a contract to replace the boilers and some other stuff for $3 million. So it would be a great opportunity for the city if we could agree that allow them to purchase that building. I'll turn it over to Paul now.
Thank you, board members, for those introductory remarks. While we're on the topic of Charleston, I would like to ask the Honorable William Cogswell, Mayor of Charleston, to give us some remarks, please, Mayor.
Absolutely. Thank you, Paul, and good morning to everyone. And of course, thank you all for being here today. I want to begin by thanking the board here for its work in evaluating this landmark property and for convening this public hearing. I'd also like to thank the GSA and our federal partners for their stewardship of the U.S. Customs House and for their continued engagement with the city of Charleston. And I'll say that Charlestonians, as you all are probably well aware, have a long history of protecting our built environment. From the preservation movement led by organizations such as Historic Charleston Foundation and the Preservation Society, to Joe Riley era, when old and new were thoughtfully blended into projects like the building we're sitting in today, the Gilliard Center, our city has consistently shown that preservation and progress are not mutually exclusive. The U.S. Customs House is an iconic part of Charleston's urban fabric. It reflects our city's history as a port community and stands as a symbol of the civic role that federal buildings have played in Charleston for generations. At the same time, it invites thoughtful consideration for how historic structures can and should be used to serve the public in meaningful ways. The City of Charleston, I can say, looks forward to a continued collaboration with the Public Building Reform Board, the GSA, the OCB, and the Executive Department, as well as local residents and stakeholders as discussions about the future of this building continue. Our focus has been and will continue to be honoring the Customs House historic significance, ensuring that the existing uses are accounted for in new locations and appropriate locations, and supporting a future that will serve but also enhance the public realm. Finally, I'll say that we are committed to making this an example of how government, local, regional, state, and federal, can work efficiently together for taxpayers in ways that provide lasting benefits for the citizens of Charleston. We are very excited about this opportunity. We are very committed to it and look forward to a lot more conversations to come. So thank you for having me, and thank you again for the work that y'all are doing.
Thank you, Mayor, for your support. I now would like to invite Brian Turner, the President and CEO of the Preservation Society of Charleston, to provide some remarks, please.
Thank you. Well, first, I want to thank you, Paul, and your colleague Adam for the thoughtful engagement you've exhibited with us. You've exhibited a great deal of transparency around the process. We appreciate being brought in as a collaborator. I want to acknowledge my colleagues with Historic Charleston Foundation and the audience. Winslow, Hasty, and I have had a conversation in advance to make sure we're speaking with a singular voice as a preservation community on this process. If anything, we've learned already through even the idea of disposition here, a reminder of this incredible monument that sits within our midst, and yet few Charlestonians that I know have ever been inside. And the opportunity that we had yesterday to walk inside was incredible. It's a reminder that it's not just the exterior of this building that is remarkable. It's the incredible interior renovations that have occurred in a very sensitive way through the years that has preserved this building, and it's remained an asset due to the federal government's stewardship. That hasn't always been the case. It was also a reminder for us to check the records. In 1956, the federal government came with a different idea to Charleston and proposed demolition of the structure. And it's a credit to U.S. Congressman L. Mendel Rivers at the time, who quickly pushed back on that idea, and it seems like from the historic record that it was fast discarded. And I'm glad that we can sit here in 2026 and the idea of a demolition of such a grand, majestic, marvelous tribute to our history would not be considered for that sort of treatment. I thought it would be appropriate for me to go and discuss just a little bit about the history of the building. And because, thankfully, in 1974, the government had the foresight to place the Custom House on the National Register of Historic Places, we have that nomination as an important planning tool that can signify to future stewards what are the important character defining features to preserve, but also a little about its history in the social context. The Custom House was originally planned. The site was acquired for $130,000 by the federal government in the late 1840s, and it was designed and construction began in 1854. If you see from the exterior, we're all familiar with the pedimented porticos with Roman Corinthian columns, but when you go inside, you'll find a two-story cortile, a business room with a coved ceiling with 8 skylights. The marble doors, the window framing are really grand. We learned from the nomination that the replacement marble was quarried at Tuckahoe, New Jersey. The diamond pattern floors with white and black marble are really iconic and defining. And really, this story tells the commercial history of one of the nation's busiest early ports. Its location east of East Bay Street in what was formerly mostly marshland required a major engineering feat at the time to build the grillage, and the register nomination refers to that process. By the summer 1879, when the building was completed, the total cost was $2,800,000. $806,915.43. So moving to next steps, the Section 111 process of the National Historic Preservation Act was mentioned, which is an authority at 54 U.S.C. 306-121 that prioritizes for prior to investigations of disposition of federal property, historic ground leases that could accomplish similar goals in terms of revenue to support maintenance without going through a potential costly and complicated process of full disposition of the property. And I want to say that because I think expediency is a concern of the board, that should full disposition be considered, that we would expect a robust Section 106 process. We, and I would think the city would come to the table as a consulting party in that process, working with the GSA to ensure that adverse effects in the future can be avoided. And because our local Board of Architectural Review only regulates exteriors of property, to avoid those effects, substantial interior covenants and protections would need to be provided by easement. And that's the typical way the GSE does it. Those, of course, can be complicated, and it seems that similar protections could be achieved through the terms of a lease agreement, for example, that would avoid that process. So I would encourage the board to first really investigate its authorities to advise on historic leasing opportunities with a priority to uses, preferably the local government having the first seat at the table in that process, to restore public access to the building and ensure that public access can continue. And I'll just end on the general support for, the best practices in historic preservation is to restore a building as it was originally designed and maintain that use. And finding uses that will bring our public back into this grand space in the future is something that's very much our interest, and we're going to work in good faith with the board and the GSA as decisions are made to make sure that happens. So thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you, Brian, for your remarks. I'm now going to turn it back over to Mr. Garral, who's going to talk about some of the other properties we're looking at in the southeast.
Thanks, Paul. We're taking a look at some other properties that the board is assessing in the southeast. You will hear us mention consistent themes such as underutilization and deferred maintenance, capital liabilities. We determine utilization through agency occupancy data, which in turn informs our analysis of the space replication costs. Meanwhile, capital liabilities represent a huge strain on us all. So the net benefits to the American taxpayer in selling these aging and deficient assets are the sale proceeds combined with the deferred maintenance liabilities that would be eliminated. The deferred maintenance is scary. As taxpayers, we could never afford to bring these buildings up to the standards that they should be. We're looking at two buildings in Savannah, the Custom House again and the Juliet Gordon Low Federal Building B. The board visited both of these properties and observed underutilization, deferred maintenance challenges, etc. At the Custom House pictured at the top, no more than 20 employees were observed. This puts the taxpayer annual cost to house these employees at approximately $158,000 per employee. Local historic preservation groups expressed excitement for this property to come to market and ultimately achieve the highest and best use. The Juliet Gordon Low building pictured below all presented low utilization and capital liabilities. 2004 utilization data showed only 17% daily occupancy. The board has sought current occupancy data to reflect active utilization under the administration's return to office mandate. The city expressed interest in this property as well for their expansion needs. Proceeds from a sale would be used to relocate and build out new space for the Army Corps of Engineers, optimized to meet their true housing needs.
The three Columbia, South Carolina properties seen here carry significant deferred maintenance liabilities and underutilization challenges. Pictured above, we see the Strom Thurmond Federal Complex, which consists of a multi-tenant federal office tower and a two-story courthouse. The buildings sit on the same parcel and share mechanical systems. The courthouse is 100% vacant and is still maintained in condition to prevent further deterioration, all at a cost to the taxpayer. Excuse me. The federal tower carries a 38% vacancy rate, and the board believes that occupancy data would show that the actual utilization of the building is far lower than that. The Perry parking deck, located across the street, rents only 50% of its spaces to federal tenants. These properties carry over $78 million in deferred maintenance liabilities. Congressional appropriations are not coming to modernize these facilities. As I said earlier, Congress cannot appropriate its way out of this maintenance backlog. Net present value savings are achieved through the elimination of operating costs and capital liabilities while leveraging a competitive commercial lease market to realize an optimized federal footprint that can be more flexible in the future to changing agency needs. Excuse me. In Jacksonville, Florida, the commercial office market has not recovered from the COVID experience and downturn. Class A vacancies are in excess of 25%. The Charles E. Bennett Federal Building carries a 20% vacancy and over $20 million of deferred maintenance liabilities. The property is over 3 acres, blocks from the waterfront, and offers prime accessibility to I-95 and I-10 interstates. Proceeds generated through sale along with operational and capital liability savings produce net present value savings to the taxpayer while allowing the federal government to right-size its footprint via commercial leasing. Now we go to West Palm Beach. The board encountered a valuable parcel of property in the central business district comprised of 2 assets, the Paul Rogers U.S. Courthouse and a multi-tenant federal building, the AUTEC. Modernization costs of the combined assets are over $75 million, but the estimated deferred maintenance at the courthouse alone is at $50 million, which represents over 80% of the functional replacement value of the building. Basically, this means that it costs the taxpayer as much to repair this agent inefficient building as it would to construct a new one. The board has conducted research on various scenarios to leverage the high-value property to generate sufficient proceeds to rehome the AUTEC tenants into optimized commercial lease space, thereby removing potentially hazardous asbestos materials from the site and providing for a new build-to-site leased courthouse to meet a growing court space need in the district, while at the same time still generating millions in proceeds of future agency consolidations and property sales at other locations across the country. I believe we have an alternate slide titled High Value Property.
No, that's all.
Oh, okay.
Thank you, Mr. Rahal. Since we just talked about some other cities in the South, I would like to invite some representatives from those governments to address us. And first, I would like to invite Sasha Carlisle, the Chief Operating Officer for the City of Savannah, to provide some comments, please.
Thank you, Paul. Good morning. As Paul said, my name is Sasha Carlisle. I'm the Chief Operating Officer here representing the wonderful city of Savannah. It's a pleasure to be here, right here inside the beautiful landmark historic district of Charleston. And I want to thank our hosts here in this wonderful city, and especially the mayor. What a beautiful and special place. I want to thank the Public Buildings Reform Board for this opportunity to attend and participate in the meeting today. Thank you. I want to thank the board for their outreach, engagement, and communications with the City of Savannah. This process has been open and informative for all of us and is a breath of fresh air in the analysis of the potential reuse of federal property. Executive Director Walden and his colleague Adam contacted the city last summer and then met with myself and city staff in September of last year to inform and educate us about their process and to engage in stakeholder input and discussion. The City of Savannah very much appreciated the outreach involvement and making us aware of this process as the board, and in turn the President's Office of Management and Budget, evaluate opportunities for the consolidation of the federal real property inventory. The city manager, myself, and our team had the opportunity, upon GSA's request, to tour the U.S. Customs House in Savannah, as well as the Juliet Gordon Low building, and we would agree that both are in need of significant capital reinvestment and are not at peak occupancy. It was interesting to hear the board here today cite the 17% occupancy of Juliet Gordon Low. We had a similar experience. The federally owned properties in Savannah are very, very special. And as we know, Savannah, like Charleston, is a very special place. The Customs House predates our own venerated City Hall in Savannah. It was built over the site of James Oglethorpe's former wooden home. That same James Oglethorpe that gave Savannah its long-lasting, walkable, park-filled, and perhaps most importantly, its human-scale city plan that in great part remains intact today. The Juliet Gordon Low building is also special due to its scale and strategic location within the historic landmark district, occupying 2 tithing lots and overlooking one of our original squares, Telfair Square. Savannah is one of the nation's oldest cities and home to one of the nation's largest historic landmark districts, in which both of these properties sit. History and preservation are a defining element of our local culture and a huge economic driver for the city. But we also must recognize what this designation means for the livability and economic importance of the city now and in 100 years from now. According to our local Chamber of Commerce, more than 12.9 million tourists visited Savannah in 2024, generating billions of dollars in local spending for our economy. Our historic district and the buildings within it are a key economic asset that the city is committed to protect and foster and to see fully utilized. A few years ago, the National Park Service designated the City of Savannah's landmark historic district as threatened. City leaders became very concerned about this threatened status, knowing that all redevelopment in our historic district must be done with due care. Since that time, we have passed numerous ordinances, planning overlays, and put together oversight committees to monitor and protect and preserve Savannah's historic district. The city has partnered with many nonprofit, community, and citizen groups to help regulate uses and construction activity in the area. One of those community partners is actually here with us today, the Historic Savannah Foundation, and I want to thank the Historic Savannah Foundation for their diligence and their creativity in preserving historic assets within Savannah's historic district and throughout the city, and for their interest and participation in today's meeting. The City of Savannah looks forward to working with the PBRB, the GSA, other federal agencies, and our local partners and our residents to ensure a win-win outcome in this assessment and potential disposition of any federal buildings in the historic landmark district. And I'll end by just saying once again, thank you to the board. Thank you for your openness and transparency and your commitment to stewardship and public engagement. The City of Savannah truly appreciates you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Carlisle. I would now like to invite Teresa Wilson, the city manager for the City of Columbia, to provide some remarks, please.
Thank you so much, Paul. We, too, are very appreciative of being included, Columbia, South Carolina, and on behalf of Mayor Daniel Rickman, who sends his regrets, Mayor Cogswell, not being able to be here. He is having responsibilities with the U.S. Conference of Mayors in their winter meeting right now. But I am on deck and am so elated to meet some of my colleagues in municipal governance and definitely members of the board. The City of Columbia, South Carolina appreciates the collaborative, transparent, and proactive approach taken by the Public Buildings Reform Board as it develops recommendations for its third report. I want to echo the same remarks that throughout this process, the PBRB team, particularly Mr. Adam Oliver, has been consistently accessible and responsive to city officials. Their early and substantive engagement with local government reflects a strong model of federal-local cooperation. While the statute requires notification to affected local governments no fewer than 45 days prior to transmittal of the final report, the PBRB has gone beyond this requirement by engaging the city well in advance and by working directly with local governments. Cities are uniquely positioned to understand our local market dynamics, the infrastructure investments and redevelopment opportunities, and we definitely appreciate the board's recognition of that role. The proposed disposal of the Strom-Thurmond Federal Building Complex presents a significant opportunity to activate an underutilized downtown submarket located at a highly prominent gateway into Columbia's urban core. This site sits at the intersection of major public investments and future economic activity in Columbia, positioning it to serve as a catalytic redevelopment opportunity rather than remaining vacant or underutilized. And I really have tried to speak from the lens of the mission of the board and the criteria that was reiterated earlier of occupancy, low occupancy, capital liability, and reinvestment in local communities. Just a few blocks away, the city has invested more than $25 million in the revitalization of Finley Park. It's transformed a premier civic park and public gathering space for us. And if there's any indication, even on the coldest of days that we're experiencing, all of the children, all of the families, people are enjoying that park immensely. Thousands of visitors to the park in just a short period of time since we reopened it in November. And again, it sits very adjacent to the Strom-Thurmond Federal Complex. Nearby, the city is also consolidating municipal operations into a single tower adjacent to the recently announced Grand Bohemian Hotel, which will become our first four-star hotel in the city's history. In addition, we are planning investments on the reconstruction of Assembly Street, which will enhance connectivity between the Strom-Thurmond complex and two major activity centers in downtown Columbia, the Main Street District and the Congaree River Vista Corridor. So Columbia, our capital city, is experiencing an inflection point. And so this corridor where the Strom-Thurmond complex becomes even more critical that we elevate and activate those spaces if given the opportunity. As City Council and the broader community continue to reinvest in downtown Columbia, we view the Strom-Thurmond complex as a critical property that cannot be left vacant or underutilized. Like its namesake, the site carries significant civic and historic weight within our community. The Strom-Thurmond Courthouse, one of the buildings in the complex, presents an excellent opportunity, actually, for us for municipal court operations. Mayor Rickham and I marvel that unbeknownst to us, and we're just 2 to 3 blocks away at City Hall, that the Strom-Thurmond complex and the courthouse in particular had been sitting vacant for several years. So again, the conversations organically that occurred with Mayor Rickham and members of the board, I think at some point in the last month, is another reason why these relationships are so important, because even from a public safety standpoint, from a standpoint of opportunities that may be there, we need to know what's going on in the buildings or not going on in the buildings that are close by. Again, the city is interested in an option to pursue such a lease in the immediate future apart from this process, combined with the availability of structured parking, which is at a premium and very much so needed as we're experiencing such growth in our city. This would help support court operations and Finley Park. As I mentioned, the redevelopment potential of the adjacent office building, the Strom-Thurmond Federal Building Complex, creates a rare alignment of civic need, public investment, and market opportunity. In closing, the city believes this proposed disposal also presents an opportunity to pursue an innovative public-private partnership. A thoughtfully structured P3 could allow for the continued long-term public use of not only the courthouse, while enabling redevelopment of the Strom Thurmond Federal Building Complex in a manner that activates the site, leverages surrounding public investments, and achieves the highest and best value for taxpayers. For these reasons, the City of Columbia advocates for the Public Buildings Reform Board's inclusion of this set of properties in its third report and formally conveys the city's interest, along with the demonstrated community value in pursuing redevelopment of the site if given the opportunity to fully assess the building's structural integrity. And that's another point that, as practitioners in local government, we welcome the opportunity to have due diligence, information sharing of reports and assessments about these buildings so that we too can be good stewards if we are able to transform them and continue to encourage their use. Obviously, we would need information to make those decisions to be good stewards of taxpayer dollars. The city looks forward to continued collaboration with PBRB, the Office of Management and Budget, and the GSA as this process advances. And thank you so much again for our participation.
Thank you, Ms. Wilson, for your remarks. We are now going to open it up for questions and answers, and as a reminder, we are preparing a recording and transcript of this hearing, and the transcript and the slide deck will be uploaded to our website here in the next few days, and our website is just pbrb.gov. Again, it'll be uploaded to that website. I would like to ask you, we'll start out with questions from the live audience first. If you would approach the microphone on either end of the room and state your name and what company or agency you're with, please, for the record. And I think Adam said someone from the Savannah Historic Society wanted to ask a question or make a statement. Oh, here we go.
Hi.
Yes, sir.
Can y'all hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Jack Duncan, and I practice architectural design here in Charleston and teach at the College of Charleston within the Historic Preservation and Community Planning Department. So I want to begin by recognizing the care and effort that city staff, boards, and community members continue to bring to Charleston's growth. These are complex decisions, and they deserve thoughtful processes as much as thoughtful outcomes. As the city faces projects of increasing scale and consequence, I believe that one of our challenges in that many conversations happen too late. By the time proposals are public, designs are finished, positions are set, and the room for shared understanding is narrowed. I'd like to suggest that Charleston consider the value of permanent civic space dedicated to early design thinking and public conversation. If the Charleston Customs House in particular were to ever become available, it could serve as such a place, not as a regulatory body or advocacy organization, but as a neutral forum where citizens, designers, preservationists, developers, and city staff can come together early to study sites, review precedent, host public lectures, and hold working sessions before formal applications are submitted. Used in this way, the Customs House would support the city's existing processes rather than compete with them. It would help surface shared principles earlier, reduce conflict later, and give the public a clearer understanding of how decisions are made. This is not a proposal for a specific project, and not a critique of ongoing engagement efforts. It's simply an invitation to think about how we invest in the city's capacity to make good decisions over time. Charleston has long been a steward of the past. I hope we can be intentional about stewarding the processes that will shape its future. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for your comments. Any other questions or comments from our live audience? Please step forward. All right. We're now going to open it to questions from our virtual audience, and I think, Adam, you said you don't have any questions from the Teams link? No? All right, well, any final comments from our board? I want to thank everyone again for coming out this morning. We appreciate your input and insight and support of what we're trying to do. Yes, Mr. Winstead.
Paul, I just had be helpful just for some additional comments. Congress passed an act a year ago, January, called the Use It Act. And what that also does, we had some input into that, but it demands utilization of the federally owned buildings at 60%. If the building is not used at least 60% of the time, GSA's got to dispose it. So we have new authorities in place that really do back up what the board's trying to do. Before that, there was never a mandate of utilization of buildings by 60%. So I'd mention that as a factor that's fairly recent. The other thing to understand is that, GSA has both a leased and owned portfolio. It has basically 50-50, about 100 million square feet of leased and 180 million square feet of leased, 180 million square feet of owned. And what the board understands GSA's leadership is focused on is really that core owned assets, to really look at the appropriated funds they get from Congress, reinvest them in the buildings that are sustainable. The O&M is not so large that it diminishes revenue return to GSA and the federal taxpayer. So I want to mention that. Thirdly, that as you all well know, the office markets in most urban areas are in distress. DC has 22 to 24% office vacancies. So looking at what the assets that we're talking about, talked about today, we are talking about around the country and in our report, it's the best possible time to be looking at flexible, more cost-effective housing of federal employees. In private sector buildings that, because of the revenue and the REIT demands of return back to the owners, they're better kept and they're more cost effective. We calculated that in DC through Jones Lang LaSalle, the cost per employee in the District of Columbia in private sector office buildings is $10,000 per year. You've heard comments from the board that in some of these buildings that we've studied, the cost is over $100,000 per year per employee. So that's a development that makes this very timely, is that the current state of the office market is pretty depressed around the country. One other comment is the board was, we're very committed, have been historically for 6 years, working daily with GSA to share information, to tell them where we're headed, to tell them what we're finding. So that will continue, but I will say that one very positive development that the board reported out in their first report 3 or 4 years ago, and then again last March, is that we've really recommended that GSA use brokers in the disposal process. They were not doing that before, and that, the Custom House, all these major buildings in major urban areas are complicated. We've heard that from our municipal officials, you've heard it from the board. And fortunately, GSA is now doing that. And two of the assets I mentioned in DC, the old, it was the Department of Treasury building in Southwest Washington, and then the former regional GSA building, 7th and D Street Southwest. GSA has engaged brokers, and what I've seen, and what the board has also seen, is that the speed in which that asset was studied, the speed in which, and comprehensive nature of the outreach to potential builders, owners, redevelopers, residential developers, and hotel developers was much, much better. And those assets went through very expeditiously through the GSA process. So I think the fact that GSA is now, for these complicated assets, engaging private sector people in markets that really understand the market is a very positive development. And then lastly, as Brian said, the administrator of GSA and the commissioner of GSA has authorities through FASTA that ensure, that give them more flexibility, and one of which is the return from sales go into a fund that's a part of what we were established, Federal Asset Fund, that can be utilized by agencies that dispose of that asset to reinvest in better real estate decisions. So before our board, before our law, if a federal agency was disposing of a property, those funds were going to the U.S. Treasury, not back to them for their housing mission. Now they're coming back for other purposes. So that's an additional incentive for federal agencies to look at their real holdings of real estate and make critical, cost-effective decisions, realizing that if they dispose of it, the revenues can come through appropriation process in some cases, but come back for other purposes. And then lastly, the authorities we've mentioned is the Disposal Authority of GSA and the Public Building Act. But Brian mentioned, we've seen success through Section 111 of the